There's someone inside you that you haven't met in years. Someone who used to wake up excited. Someone who believed people were good. Someone who didn't calculate every risk before taking a step. You remember them vaguely, like a dream you can't quite hold on to. But life happened. People hurt you. Circumstances broke you. And piece by piece, you buried that person under armor, under cynicism, under the belief that protecting yourself is more important than being yourself. Rumi said this is the greatest tragedy, not that the world breaks you, but that you forget who you were before. It did not think about the last time you felt truly free, not just happy, not just relaxed, but free. Free to say what you actually think. Free to feel what you actually feel. Free to want what you actually want without justifying it. For most people, that memory lives in childhood. Before they learned that honesty gets punished. Before they learned that vulnerability gets exploited. Before they learned that being yourself is dangerous. So they stopped. They created a version of themselves that's acceptable, safe, protected. And they've been performing that version for so long, they forgot it's not who they actually are. Rumi called this the false self, the constructed identity built from wounds and fears and other people's expectations. It's not evil. It's not wrong. It's survival. It's what you had to do to make it through. But here's the problem. The false self that protected you as a child is imprisoning you as an adult. The walls you built to keep pain out are now keeping life out. The armor that once saved you is now suffocating you. And somewhere deep inside, the real you is still there, waiting, watching, hoping that one day you'll remember. This person, the one you were before the world broke you, they weren't naive. They weren't foolish. They were open. They were authentic. They were connected to something real inside themselves. They laughed without thinking about how it looked. They cried without feeling ashamed. They loved without keeping score. They trusted not because they were stupid, but because they hadn't yet learned that trust is dangerous. And then life taught them, through betrayal, through loss, through the thousand small moments where being real got them hurt, so they learned to hide. To perform, to calculate, to protect. And every time they chose safety over truth, a piece of the real self went underground. Every time they swallowed their actual feelings to keep the peace, the real self retreated deeper. Every time they became who others needed them to be instead of who they actually were, the real self faded a little more. Until one day, they couldn't find that person anymore. Until the performance became so convincing, they forgot it was a performance. Until the mask became so comfortable, they forgot they were wearing one. Rumi spent his entire life helping people remove these masks. Not because the masks are evil, but because living behind them is exhausting. Because pretending to be someone you're not drains every ounce of energy you have. Because the false self requires constant maintenance. Constant vigilance, constant performance. And no matter how good you get at it, there's always a hollow feeling, a sense that something's missing. A quiet voice asking, is this really all there is? That voice is the real you, the person you were before the world broke you. And they're not asking for much. They're not demanding that you become someone new. They're just asking to be remembered, to be acknowledged, to be allowed to exist again. But here's what stops most people. Fear. The same fear that created the false self in the first place. Because if you let the real you come back, you become vulnerable again. You risk being hurt again. You open yourself up to all the pain you've spent years protecting yourself from. And part of you would rather stay safe and empty than be real and risk getting broken again. But Rumi would ask you a question. Are you actually safe? Or are you just alone? Because the walls you built to keep pain out also keep connection out. The armor that protects you from hurt also prevents you from love. The cynicism that shields you from disappointment also blocks you from joy. You think you're protecting yourself, but what you're actually doing is slowly disappearing, becoming a ghost of who you were meant to be, living half a life, feeling half your feelings, being half yourself, and calling it wisdom. This is not wisdom. This is fear pretending to be wisdom. This is trauma pretending to be maturity. This is survival mode pretending to be living. And the real you, the person buried under all that protection, they're suffocating. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly fading, waiting for permission to come back, waiting for you to decide that being real is worth the risk of being hurt, waiting for you to remember that you weren't born to be safe. You were born to be alive. So how do you find that person again? How do you reconnect with who you were before the world broke you? Rumi said it doesn't happen through addition. It happens through subtraction. You don't become your real self by adding new layers. You become your real self by removing the layers that aren't you, by peeling back the armor, by questioning the beliefs you absorbed from your wounds, by noticing when you're performing and choosing to stop, by catching yourself in the act of being someone you're not and asking, who am I actually? This process is uncomfortable because every layer you remove reveals a vulnerability. Every belief you question shakes your foundation. Every moment you stop performing feels like standing naked in public. But here's what happens on the other side of that discomfort. You start to feel real again. You start to recognize yourself. You start to remember what it was like to be connected to your actual feelings, your actual desires, your actual truth. And that feeling, that sense of coming home to yourself, is worth every uncomfortable moment it took to get there. But let's be honest about what this costs. Because Rumi never promised it would be easy. When you start being real, some people won't like it. The people who benefited from your performance will resist your authenticity. The relationships built on your false self will either transform or end. The life you constructed around being acceptable will start to crack. And for a while, it will feel like everything is falling apart. But what's actually happening is that everything false is falling away. And what remains is what's real. What's actually yours. What's actually you. This is terrifying for most people. Because they've invested so much in the false self. They've built careers around it, relationships around it, entire identities around it. And the thought of letting that go feels like losing everything. But Rumi would tell you that you can't lose what was never real. You can't lose a performance. You can only stop performing. And what you gain when you do is infinitely more valuable than what you lose. You gain yourself back. The person you were before the world broke you. The person who's been waiting inside you all along. And here's what nobody tells you about that person. They're not weak. They're not naive. They're not going to get you hurt the way you fear they will. Because they're not the child who didn't know better. They're the child's essence combined with the adult's awareness. Their innocence informed by experience. Openness protected by wisdom. Trust that's earned rather than blindly given. They're not asking you to be foolish. They're asking you to be real. And there's a massive difference. Being real doesn't mean being reckless. Being real means being honest. With yourself first. About what you feel. About what you want. About what matters to you. About who you actually are beneath all the layers of protection and performance. And then, gradually, being honest with others. Not in a way that's cruel or careless, but in a way that's genuine. In a way that says, this is who I am, and I'm no longer willing to pretend otherwise. This honesty will cost you some things. Some relationships. Some opportunities. Some versions of success that were never really yours to begin with. but it will give you something far more valuable. It will give you integrity. The sense that your inside matches your outside. That you're not constantly managing different versions of yourself. That you can finally rest because you're no longer performing. And that rest, that sense of finally being able to exhale, is what the real you has been craving all along. Rumi had a student once who asked him why it hurts so much to be real. And Rumi said it hurts because you're remembering. You're remembering what it felt like before you learned to hide. You're remembering the losses that taught you to protect yourself. You're remembering every moment you chose safety over truth. And that remembering is painful. But it's also necessary, because you can't heal what you don't acknowledge. You can't integrate what you keep buried. You can't become whole while parts of you remain in hiding. So the path back to your real self runs directly through your pain, through the moments that broke you, through the experiences that taught you to hide, not to relive them, not to drown in them, but to finally feel them, to acknowledge what they took from you, to grieve the innocence you lost, and then, slowly, carefully, to reclaim what remains. Because the world broke you, but it didn't destroy you. The real you survived, buried but breathing, waiting for the day you'd be strong enough to dig them out, and that day can be today. Not all at once. You don't remove years of armor in a single moment. But you can start. You can notice one moment today where you're performing instead of being real. One conversation where you're saying what's expected instead of what's true. One decision where you're choosing safety over authenticity. And in that moment, you can pause. You can breathe. And you can choose differently. Not because it's comfortable, but because the person you were before the world broke, you deserves to exist again. This is not about becoming someone new. This is about remembering someone old, someone original, someone authentic, the you that existed before you learned to be anyone else. And every time you choose truth over performance, every time you choose being real over being safe, every time you let a piece of armor fall away, that person gets a little stronger. That person comes a little closer to the surface. That person starts to breathe again. Rumi said that most people die without ever living as themselves. They spend their whole lives being who they think they should be, who others need them to be, who safety demands they be. And they reach the end having never met their real self, having never expressed their actual truth, having never lived from their authentic core. And that, he said, is the real death. Not the end of the body, but the burial of the soul while you're still breathing. But you don't have to be one of those people. You can choose differently. You can choose to excavate yourself, to dig through the layers, to remove the armor, to question the performance, to reconnect with the person who's been waiting inside you all along. It won't be easy. It won't be comfortable. It won't be safe. But it will be real. And real is what that person inside you has been craving since the day you buried them. The world broke you. But the break doesn't have to be permanent. You can heal. Not by becoming harder. Not by building more walls. Not by perfecting your armor. But by remembering who you were before you needed armor. By honoring that person. By giving them permission to exist again. By being brave enough to be vulnerable again. By trusting that being real is worth the risk. By choosing to live as yourself even if it costs you everything built on being someone else. Because here's the truth Rumi would want you to know. The person you were before the world broke you is not gone. They're not dead. They're not lost forever. They're inside you right now, reading these words, feeling something stir, recognizing themselves, hoping that maybe, finally, you'll let them out. And the moment you do, the moment you remove even one layer of protection and let them breathe, you'll realize something profound. They were worth protecting. But they were never meant to stay buried. They were meant to be lived. And it's not too late to start.